Call our meeting to order tonight. Renata, if you would do the roll call, please.
Evans.
Here.
Eddinger.
Here.
McEvers.
Here.
Gookin.
Yep.
Miller.
Here.
English.
Here. Do we have Pastor Hartfield here tonight? Pastor Hartfield was scheduled to give our invocation, so we will rise now for the Pledge of Allegiance. Woody, if you'd lead us in the pledge.
Love to. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Don't believe we have any amendments to the agenda tonight, so we will move into presentations. And do we have someone here to accept the proclamation? Right then, the back, come on up and I'll read the proclamation and get that for you. Kathleen Goodwin. So this is National Safe Boating Week, and I have a proclamation that I would like to read. Whereas on average, 700 people die each year in boating-related accidents in the United States, and nearly 70% of these fatalities are caused by drowning. Whereas the vast majority of these accidents are caused by human error or poor judgment and not by the boat, equipment, or environmental factors. Whereas a significant number of boaters who lose their lives by drowning each year would be alive today had they worn their life jackets. Whereas modern life jackets are more comfortable, more attractive, and more wearable than styles of years past, and deserve a fresh look by today's boating public. Now, therefore, I, Steve Widmeyer, Mayor of the City of Coeur d'Alene, do hereby proclaim the week of May 19th through May 25th, 2018 as National Safe Boating Week. So come give this to you.
My name's Kathy Goodwin, and I'm the District Commodore of the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary District 13. And I oversee 1,000 volunteers from Idaho, Montana, Washington, and Oregon. We have no law enforcement authority, but we promote safety on the water. Our main mission is recreational boating safety. At this time of year, people have a false sense of security because of the warm weather. I went to Honeysuckle Beach last week, and there were a lot of people on, sunning themselves on the blankets and all. But we have to remember, as the snow is melting, the rivers and the lakes, the water is so cold. I checked today, and Lake Coeur d'Alene is 37 degrees. So we promote safety. We work with the Kootenai County Sheriff Department as well as Idaho Park and Rec. There are 102 life jacket loaner stations over the whole state of Idaho, and we have several here as well. So my message is life jackets save lives. Please wear yours. And May 18th is Wear Your Life Jacket to Work Day. So what do you think, board? So I'll talk to you about it later. And we're always looking for volunteers, local here, Flotilla 84 for the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary. And we do wonderful, wonderful things. And the City Council could, if anyone's interested, they can give them my name and phone number. So thank you all, and please be safe. We're trying to save lives, so thank you.
Great, thank you very much. We will move on in our presentations for the fiscal year 2017-18 audit, and we have Tony Hackwith of Anderson Brothers here to give the presentation.
Okay, good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm here to present your results of your, it's actually 2016-17 financial statement audit. First of all, I want to say thank you to the staff and management of the city for their cooperation and patience during all the time we spend down here doing our field work and audit procedures. I have a brief presentation here for you this evening, and if you have any questions, please stop me at any time. If I'm unable to answer your questions, I will get back to you as soon as I can. Okay. First of all, the reason that you have a financial statement audit is you're required to have it by the state statutes. And that's so that the citizens, management, council, and the state can be assured that your financial statements are materially correct and materially represented, and also in accordance with governmental GAAP. As a result of our audit procedures, we issue 3 separate reports. The first report is an independent auditor's report over your financial statements as a whole. This year and previous years, we've issued an unmodified opinion, which is also called a clean opinion. It means that we were able to audit your financial records and that your financial statements are presented materially correct. And so you can be proud of that. You have great staff that are in your accounting and finance department. The second report is a report on internal control over financial reporting and compliance and other matters based on an audit of financial statements performed in accordance with government auditing standards, basically over your internal controls at the city. That also was an unmodified opinion that we issued. There were no findings. And then the third report is over your federal funds. We have to audit your federal funds if you receive more than $750,000 in federal funding in any given year. And our audit over those programs was also an unmodified opinion and a clean opinion. Internal control testing in a financial statement audit. Internal controls over your financial reporting are your policies and procedures that are in place to reasonably ensure compliance with the city's policies and procedures over your financial reporting. The objective of internal control testing is performed in order to plan and perform our audit of the financial statements in order to express opinion on your financial statements. Testing of internal controls is not performed for the purpose of expressing an opinion on the effectiveness of the city's internal controls. Sometimes that is misunderstood, that we're in here and issuing an opinion on your internal controls. We have to audit them and test them to make sure that they're operating effectively. And as I said previously, there were no findings noted as a result of our testing of your internal controls during our audit. Okay, this slide and the next 2 slides show the difference between what the city anticipated receiving for revenues and anticipated expending versus what you actually received and actually spent. So it's your final budget versus your actual results. As you can see with this first slide, your revenues were about $257,000 more than what you had anticipated. Your final amended budget was $3.66 million, and your actual revenue was $3.68 million. This slide shows the expenditures of the city, your budget versus actual, how you did compared to what you thought you were going to do. And again, here it's a positive variance on your expenditure side. You actually spent $1.23 million less than you had anticipated. The largest variances were in your general government and public safety spending. And your overall net change in your fund balance, which is your revenues over your expenses for the year, were $1.28 million, which was less, sorry. It's $2.8 million. You spent $2.8 million more than you had anticipated. Excuse me, I'm gonna go back. Your revenues over expenses or under expenses were $2.8 million. You had anticipated that number being $4 million, spending $4 million more than what you brought in that year. So you do have a positive variance of $1.28 million. This next graph shows the revenues, your revenues, transfers in from other funds, debt issuance from bond obligations. Those are in the green shaded areas over the last 5 years, and then your expenditures over the last 5 years are at the bottom of the graph in the red. Okay. So as a result of revenues over expenses over the years, you create what's called your fund balance. A lot of times people, citizens, council, mayor, and management very interested in this number to see how you're doing and where you stand. It's important to have a fund balance. This graph right here breaks down the various components of your fund balance at the end of the year. The blue area represents unassigned fund balance, so that's monies that you have available for discretionary spending. The other colors represent those that you have assigned for purposes, specific purposes, committed for specific purposes, or are restricted by outside sources for specific purposes, such as grant funding and such. So you had $8.3 million in unassigned fund balance at the end of the fiscal year.
And Tony, I'm going to assume that in 2015, that's our GO bond.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, then talk about why a fund balance is important. Your revenue streams are not consistent from month to month. You get two lump sums for property taxes. Your state revenues come in on a quarterly basis. Your vendors, your employees want to typically be paid on a monthly basis. So it's important to have a fund balance to continue operations. It also provides prudent resources to meet unexpected emergencies and protect against catastrophic events. It meets uncertainties of federal and state funding if those were to be reduced, and also protects the city from unnecessary borrowing. However, if you do need to borrow, it also allows you to get a credit rating that would qualify you for a lower interest rate. So fund balance is very important. The Government Finance Officers Association issues two different benchmarks. One is of where your fund balance should be. One is they say 5 to 15% of your regular general fund operating revenues should be in your fund balance, or no less than 1 to 2 months of your general fund operating expenses.
Is that written down somewhere?
It's, yes.
No, I mean, you're quoting this from,
Yes.
that's a recommendation
The GFOA,
by,
Government Finance Officers Association.
so it's, again, it's what were the numbers?
5 to 15% of your operating revenues,
Okay.
or 1 to 2 months of your operating expenses.
And those are minimums.
Those are minimums.
They don't set maximums.
They don't. They do not.
Thank you.
They do not. Some other governmental agencies will set minimums as well, and a lot of times those are 3 to 4 months.
Right.
Okay. So these next two graphs show where you are at in comparison to the recommended minimums. So again, the GFOA recommends at a minimum an unassigned fund balance of no less than 5 to 15% of your revenues, general fund operating revenues, and you're at 23, 25% the last couple years. And this slide shows number of days expenditures in your unassigned fund balance. And again, the recommended minimums, 30 to 60 days. You were at 73 at the end of this most recent fiscal year and 83, 82 the last couple of years. Okay, now I'm going to move on to your proprietary funds. At the end of your fiscal year this year, every major proprietary fund increased its revenues for charges for services. The wastewater's increase was the most significant at $776,000, and the total change in service revenue across all of your proprietary funds was $1.8 million, reflecting a 9.26% increase from the prior year. And just to note, these funds, unlike your general fund, should be self-sustaining, and you should have operating income and enough that you can allow for to have money left over so that you can pay for infrastructure and improvements that are needed. Your operating performance across all of your proprietary funds was a net income of $3.8 million. And again, wastewater had the highest net operating income of $1.46 million. The next two graphs will show you your water fund and wastewater fund over the last 5 years as far as operating revenues and expenses. You can see that in the water fund in 13, 14, 15, your revenues, and actually 16, your revenues were shy of your expenses, your operating expenses. So again, you definitely want to have operating revenues exceeding expenses. And this last slide shows your wastewater fund. And the last couple of years, you actually did have operating revenues over expenses in that fund. Broke even the previous 2 years and were short of revenues the prior in 13.
All right, questions of council for Tony? Dan English.
sometimes you read that governmental accounting is kind of beyond the minds of mortal men. But could you give kind of a brief thumbnail layman's, is there really a big difference? What are the big difference between what people would call kind of regular accounting and governmental and or nonprofit?
Okay. In nonprofit accounting, similar to your proprietary funds, the biggest differences are that you account for your long-term obligations. So if you have debt, that's on your balance sheet, and your capital assets. If you have capital assets, that's also on your balance sheet, and you depreciate those capital assets. So that's called a full accrual basis of accounting. And your proprietary funds are on that basis. So that's typical to a regular operating business as well. Your general fund, your governmental funds, operate on what's called a modified accrual basis, and so current resources. So you don't show your capital assets or your long-term debt, and in your financial statement, you actually show not your depreciation expense on capital assets, but the outlay that you actually spent to purchase any capital assets that year. So if you spent $1 million in capital assets, that hit your expenditure line item rather than sitting on the balance sheet and being depreciated over 5, 7, 10 years. Those are the major differences. Full accrual, so it's looking at, your general fund is looking at what current resources, what current revenues coming in currently in the next fiscal year, operating year, and what are our expenses in the next fiscal cycle. Is that?
Thanks. Yep.
Okay.
Other questions? Woody?
Just a couple. So you guys go in and make sure that everything we say we did. But you don't judge. You don't say you shoulda, coulda, woulda.
Correct. We don't tell you how to operate the city. We make sure that what you say you're going to do, what you said you did, is what you actually did as far as your financial statements and financial reporting.
But you don't leave a list of you try doing this, or you can betterly do it this way or that way.
If we see areas, like when we're doing internal control testing over your payroll and revenue and expenditure systems, if we see an area that there could be improvements on, we would certainly point that out to management and staff, and if it was extremely imperative that we felt necessary, we'd issue a management letter.
Thank you.
And Tony, you make sure that we're following generally accepted accounting principles that the city is. That's part of your testing that you do.
Correct, and that's one of the overall arching principles of why we do the audit procedures, is to make sure you're following GAAP and governmental GAAP, and that you can rely on, the assets that are reported in your financial statement are truly what you have in the bank, for instance, or receivables. Liabilities that you owe to vendors are truly what you owe to vendors, so.
Okay. Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to say that I read this. It was wonderful. Thank you. No, actually, this was not that bad. I met with Vonnie yesterday, went over some of the finer points, and say that I understood what was going on here and why you do what you do. And you were right when you said this is for the public. We don't do this for accountants. We don't do this for financial people. We do it so that members of the public can see how we spent the money and that we spent what we said we would. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate that.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
And then, Troy, this is posted online once we have this meeting tonight, and then it's posted online.
It's been on since Tony and Vonnie have put this together. This also goes to the state so that we can comply with that, and then all of our interested GO bond holders have access to it as well. So it's been up for probably a month already.
Yes, and also the federal government receives a copy.
Okay. Ron, did you have something?
Yeah, Tony, so you're saying that Troy and Vonnie have done a very good job for the city?
I would say that your finance and accounting staff have done a very good job for the city. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Tony? Thank you, and also thank Vonnie. I know Vonnie spends hundreds and hundreds of hours on working with Tony and providing all the information, so thank both of you.
And she
for the
does.
report.
In fact, most of my audits, I write the reports as well. Here, Vonnie does the report writing, which is a huge feat and task, and she does a great job.
Yeah. Which probably saves on your fee too, right?
It does.
Yeah, there we
Yes,
go.
it does.
I like that. All right, thank you, Tony. Appreciate
Thank you.
it. We'll move on to the Riverstone Transit Center, and we have Jody Beasy, the Director of the Kootenai County Transit System, here tonight. Welcome, Jody.
Thank you for letting me give you an update. I'm going to see if I can do this. Oops, right-handed. Okay, thank you. We're at the end of the presentation. Sorry about that. All right.
Just type 1, enter.
Really?
Yeah.
Thank you. If I can get it back. May I have assistance, please? Thank you. You're left-handed, so it's hard.
I know.
There we go.
Our little lefty, that's okay. We'll get you from the beginning. There you
Okay,
go.
left-handed, that's why it's just a little challenging. Okay. Okay, here we go. This is the Riverstone Transit Center as it looks today. The 3 routes, the A, B, and C, this is the hub. We had Kaufman Engineers as well as ALSC architects conduct a site analysis. And the site analysis included determining sun angles, prevailing winds, natural drainage, as well as access points into the site and the visibility of the site from Celtice, John Loop, and West Riverstone Drive. As you know, we actually had a design advisory committee come together. And so in December 2017, the Riverstone Transit Center Design Committee was formed to serve as an advisory role, providing input to the pre-design phase of the Riverstone project. The committee was comprised of representatives of public transportation stakeholders. The committee met on the 13th of December 2017 and again on the 28th of February 2018. The 13th of December 2017 meeting was a visioning session facilitated by Jeff Warner from ALSC Architects. Jeff asked the committee to share their vision for the transit center, describe the most important elements of the transit center and what the transit center needed to accomplish. The committee was asked to describe the most important aspects of the transit center from a user perspective and then their thoughts on security. The design principles were developed from the input received from the design committee, and these design principles provide a foundation to guide the design process throughout the entire project. There were 3 schemes, if you will. The first scheme was the long loop. The second scheme was the racetrack. And the third scheme was the Great Divide. The Great Divide was the unanimous selection. The Riverstone Transit Center is going to be done in 2 phases. There's going to be phase 1 and phase 2. So what you see here is phase 1. We'll have the building and the parking, around 80 stalls. And the left side will be future, but for now our funding covers just phase 1. And that's what it looks like when you're coming up to it. Beauteous. That's another angle for you. Side angle. Different angle. That's what it looks like from the side, from the parking lot. Another angle. Gives you kind of an overview. The inside of the building, this provides you with the layout of the inside of the building. And there's the design schedule. So I'm just going to go back to the beauteous one. There you go. Questions?
So Jody, phase 2, that one is phase 1. What would phase 2 include? And is there any time frame for that?
It will be dependent upon funding, our ability to get the funding, so let's say 3 to 5 years. And the idea would be then to complete the parking.
Okay. So then this is, to follow your schedule, completion and start operations in next year?
Yes, June.
So in June of
2019.
next year. So basically a little over a year from now.
Yes.
Okay. All right, Woody.
Jody, so this really looks cool. Do you guys have to do the maintenance?
Yes.
Parking lots, keeping everything clean, there's public restrooms?
Yes.
Looks like a lot of offices and cool sitting places. Where do the buses live? Do the buses live there?
No, they do not. We actually have a separate location to store the buses. So this location is primarily a transit hub where the 3 bus routes originate and their destination, and that they will not be stored there for security purposes. At this point, we wanted to have it behind a gated location.
So that's where the mechanics live and bus drivers go to work and that kind of stuff?
Well, the maintenance is done actually by the tribe. So the Coeur d'Alene tribe has a maintenance facility down in Plummer. And the bus drivers, yes, they are local, so they are here. They pick up the bus over at what we consider the gravel pit, which is Post Falls. And then we have them stored there. And we have a little place for the drivers to come in and be able to pick up their bus and then leave their vehicle, and then they come to the transit center.
And so I noticed on that office there's a dispatch.
Yes.
What is a dispatch for buses?
We have paratransit as well as the fixed route, and so yes, you need dispatch for a variety of reasons. Like for today, for example, the dispatch was rang to serve because they were having a problem with the bus, and so dispatch then is able to get the right resources immediately to the bus and take care of that to keep it on time. And then dispatching for paratransit is that we actually schedule the rides for those people who have disabilities.
Okay. Is there a snack bar there?
No, but if you'd like, we would be more than happy to put one in.
I was just thinking to try and stop by and get a soda, you know. Okay.
Yeah, well, we'll buy one for you.
All right. Thank you.
Yes.
Other questions? Amy?
So just to clarify, right now, patrons wait for the buses in between. There's that little walkway. Can you point to that?
Yeah, let me just get back to the one right there.
Right.
So
And so it's covered but not enclosed?
it's actually enclosed. If you look at it from this angle, what you're seeing is the enclosure for where the people will wait.
Okay.
It's behind that area, so it is enclosed.
Kind of between the 2 restrooms there?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, yes. And there is obviously not a full enclosure. It's just protected.
Protected?
Other questions? Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So when I attended the meeting, I told you council wanted to see something that was like a lobby, like a waiting area. So this is the waiting area
That's correct.
for people who are taking the bus. It's not really inside, but it's covered, it's out of the weather, because they got the sides on there. They have public restrooms, which they can get in and out of.
Yes.
And it's just kind of a waiting area. It's like a lobby, but it's more like a Southern California lobby because they don't need to be inside.
And the waiting time is anywhere between 3 to 5 minutes.
Assuming they get there within 3 to 5 minutes.
Exactly right, but that would be for any location.
Right, right. But they're out of the weather, which is better than they are now.
Correct.
And so I have concern about the timeline. You know, we have an election coming up, and there have been candidates who have discussed killing this thing. Can it be killed? You don't want to talk about that, do you?
I would just say that I am very excited about every day, and every day we get more done.
That's positive. I like that. I would like to see this thing happen. Well, I don't want to see it killed. So I'm hoping that we get a nice transit center out there where people can wait, and you know, you can have offices, and people also, the paratransit people can come in there and make appointments, right? I mean, they can show up and
Yes.
make arrangements. So it seems like a real good deal. And I do have to ask you, since we're here and you're the City Link goddess, what's the status of our favorite bus stop, A7 on Hubbard? How's that moving?
Well, it's still there
Okay.
currently, and we are programming A7, as I think you're aware of, that we are in the process of doing that. And then, based on our programming, we'll be more than happy to present back to this board or KMPO or KCAT our final route design. It's going to take a process. It is a process, yes. But
So you're working on it?
We are, yes.
Thank you.
So Jody, then this is scheduled to begin construction sometime late summer?
Yes.
Yeah. So you're gone and you're moving dirt and you're signing construction contracts in August. This thing is going to be built.
Yes, and we have the money.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Any other questions for Jody? Thank you very much. I know you've worked very hard on getting it to this point, and it'll be a great day when we can have the grand opening for it.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move for Approval of the consent calendar.
Well, we got one more, Woody.
Still one more?
Yeah, number 4.
Let's get out of here.
Yeah. Would you like to?
I need that soda.
Yeah. So we do have a presentation on the walk-friendly community designation. And we have Tessa and Jamie that are going to give us. Yes.
Sorry, you guys.
He's just anxious. He's had a long day.
I'm Tessa Gillett. This is Jamie Morgan. We're here on behalf of the Coeur d'Alene Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee to celebrate because we've been designated as a walk-friendly community. Walk-Friendly Communities is a national recognition program developed to encourage cities and towns across the United States to develop and support walking environments with an emphasis on safety, mobility, access, and comfort. So in December 2017, the Coeur d'Alene Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee submitted an application to be recognized as a walk-friendly community. The application highlighted the city's efforts to expand opportunities for walking and improve pedestrian safety across a wide range of programs and activities, from planning and design to outreach and law enforcement.
And to that end, last week we were informed that Coeur d'Alene has been recognized as a bronze level walk-friendly community. In addition to this recognition, we also received accolades for some of the specific actions the city and the Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee have undertaken to expand walkability. Among the highlights included on the report card were: Coeur d'Alene is working toward an updated Complete Streets policy, which will strengthen the current policy and enhance connectivity. City boasts an extensive trail system, including hiking trails and shared use paths. In the Trails and Bikeways Master Plan, Coeur d'Alene strives for regional connectivity and a trail system that encourages not only recreational, but practical travel purposes. CityLink provides accessible transit service to the city, and in order to encourage walking, the city has developed several public service announcements on safety that deal specifically with pedestrians and bicycles.
Walk-Friendly Communities awards designations from bronze to platinum to participating communities with a commitment to improving and sustaining walkability and pedestrian safety. Since 2010, 70 walk-friendly communities have been recognized across the country. In April, Walk-Friendly Communities recognized the efforts of 10 cities, including Coeur d'Alene. On behalf of the Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee, we'd like to present this Walk-Friendly Community Bronze Level Recognition Plaque to the City of Coeur d'Alene. We are happy to celebrate this award with you, and we look forward to continuing our efforts to make Coeur d'Alene a walk-friendly community.
Great. Questions for you? So, any questions for these ladies? You gotta have just one. Woody, come on, come up with a question.
Oh, yeah,
Does this mean the bicycle guys, this is part of being bicycle friendly too?
Yes, and they specifically pointed out some of our bike measures because they relate to pedestrian safety as well.
So it's the whole realm of do it yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Walk or skate or pedal.
Oh, yep, really promoting alternative forms of transportation.
Pretty cool.
And this being the bronze award, and we're simply not going to settle for bronze, right? So we probably have a plan to move our way up the ladder?
Yes, we actually met about that yesterday. Our main focus now is education. We want to improve accessibility throughout the community, specifically related to ADA compliance. So that's our next goal, but we've got until 2023 to make it happen. So.
All right.
Well, we'll make it happen before then, but we have a lot more goals that we will accomplish by then.
All right. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. All right, Woody?
All right, I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent calendar as presented.
Second.
Motion and second to approve the consent calendar. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, Renata.
Evans?
Yes.
English?
Yes.
Eddinger?
Yes.
Miller?
Yes.
McEvers?
Yes.
Gookin?
Aye.
Motion carried. Now is the time for public comment. Anyone wishing to address the council on any city business shall have 3 minutes to do so. Is there anyone in the audience that would wish to give public comment tonight? I don't see anyone, so we will move on to announcements. Any member of the council have an announcement here tonight? Kiki, why don't you give us just a brief
I was going to say, have I been too quiet over here?
You've been way too quiet over there. So you had had a very successful meeting.
The last Atlas Public Community Input meeting, we had a packed house, and I did want to let folks know I had been checking, and there's well over a couple thousand people who have checked back on the Facebook and the city website to review the last couple of workshops and the minutes there. Some great feedback, some great input, and the feasibility study team is moving forward with that, and there'll be more posted to the website after there is new information available.
Right. Thank you very much. Anyone else have any announcements? I have one appointment. I would like to appoint Erica Edson to the Urban Forestry Committee.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Now we will go to the Public Works Committee. Mike Anderson is here for a couple of things. He is here for the biosolids disposal presentation, and then he's also here for the resolution number 18-026, the approval of a professional services agreement with JUB Engineers for the design of a compost facility. So you've got a couple of tasks here you're going to accomplish. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And yeah, I've got a couple things to bring forward, but I'm very excited to bring forward this presentation on biosolids disposal costs. So I'll get right into it. And really what I was looking at was our current biodisposal method is compost, and how does composting stack up as compared to alternatives? So there's a nice shot of our compost in front of you. Before I get into it, I would like to give you just a brief overview of what our current composting looks like. So this is our composting facility, and if you look in the center of there, you see the building marked number 2. That was our first composting building, and that's where the major part of the composting happens. So composting is a mixture of where we take our biosolids, which is the solids portion that we separate out of the wastewater stream. They've been digested. We'll mix it with wood chips here and turn it into a usable product. So that was installed in 1989 as part of phase 1, we call it. So in 1992, we installed building number 8 up to the left there. That is where we store our wood chips, which are necessary to mix in. As well as over down in the bottom corner there, marked 11. That's sort of an outside composting area. So there's some aeration bays there and things like that that needed to be installed. Area 10 up at the top there, that's the finished compost section. And on the bottom left is building 1. That's where the biosolids are stored. So what happens is, as the biosolids are trucked in from the wastewater plant, they'll be placed inside building number 1. The guys will bring in a front-end loader, pull it from building 1, put it in building 2, mix in some wood chips. It'll spend about a month there inside building number 2. From there, it gets screened, which is that apparatus that you see sort of in the middle there, marked 7, 4, and 5. That's all screening processes. And we'll get out on almost finished compost. From there, it gets final curing inside that building 10 for about another month, and at that point, it can be processed. It can be sent out to the public and used for whatever on your grass or something like that. So we can get back into this a little bit later on, but this is an overview of just sort of a drawing of where we see some needed expansion to the facility. The main composting area, like I mentioned, was done in 1989 and 1992. Well, we've gotten some more solids in since then. Our city has grown a bit since then. So we're looking for some new expansions, which we'll get into next. But also you can see off to the side there just an artist rendition of a water treatment building that they're looking to set up. So here we get into the meat of it. These are I wanted to compare the costs operationally of what it costs to compost versus if we wanted to do something else like a private hauler. So you can see on the very bottom of the screen there, these are current costs it would be $338,000 annually for operation of compost versus $325,000 for a private hauler. So more or less a wash at this point. So if you'd like, I'd like to go over and break down some of these costs for you. And feel free to interrupt me at any point if you need to stay awake. The salaries and benefits for our 2 employees cost us $167,000 last year. That's not just salaries, that's obviously inclusive of medical and all the other associated costs with those employees. This O&M, this is was taken right out of our budget, was about $112,000, and that's inclusive of the costs to compost. That's electricity, that's the wood chips, and that sort of stuff that's associated with it. We spend about $25,000 a year to lease 2 different loaders that are used to move these materials around throughout the compost facility. And our administrative costs come in at, we're estimating just 20% of the personnel costs. So that comes in at $33,000. That's for administrative, downtown City Hall, us in the wastewater department, just administrative duties overseeing the compost facility. So the private hauler, you can see, is much simpler as far as breaking down costs. It's the amount of biosolids produced multiplied by how much it costs to haul them gives us $270,000. So we produced last year about 4,155 tons. Those are what we call wet tons of biosolids, multiplied by $65 per ton, which is one of our neighbors. That's what they pay to have their biosolids hauled out of their plant, and that's where we get that number. And then the administrative costs, once again, is just 20% of the contract cost, which comes in at $55,000. Okay? So currently, we're about, like I said, it's more or less even in operational costs. If you look at the operational cost plus 10%, which is what we're anticipating our solids requirements to go up. So if you'll recall, we're going to be completing tertiary treatment pretty soon, which is going to remove even more solids out of the wastewater stream. We're looking at probably about a 10% increase in solids coming out of the wastewater treatment plant. So with the composting option, the supplies, which is the wood chips and the power and everything else, that would go up approximately 10%. We'll need 10% more power, 10% more wood chips. However, the other costs, the administrative costs, the loader lease, and the personnel, those would all remain the same. There's no need for, at that volume, to increase our personnel costs or anything else like that. So we're looking at about $349,000 annually, whereas a private hauler, everything goes up by 10%. If we make 10% more sludge and we're paying $65 per ton to get rid of it, then it would go up 10%. And obviously, what we're seeing in the wastewater collection system right now is an increase in solids coming in, and that's due to our city growth. We're really not seeing an increase in water coming in, and that's due to efficient operation of washers and dryers and showers and all these low-flow apparatus that we see. But our solids are going up, so the more that our city grows, the more we'll see our solids increasing. So I was quite pleased to see the costs of composting compare equally and perhaps favorably to the alternatives. This is just a breakdown, it's in your packet there, of the various costs and that I just shown you. So I would also, beyond the costs, just like to go over a case study that is representative of a benefit that I see to composting, particularly composting handled by us within the city and not through an outside agency. In Juneau, Alaska, the city of Juneau was incinerating their sludge, but that incinerator failed in 2010, and they chose not to rehabilitate it due to the capital costs that were required. So they had Waste Management haul their sludge originally to Juneau. Eventually, they had to actually haul it all the way down to someplace in Oregon. And that cost was about the same cost that they were paying to operate their sludge incinerator. but Waste Management didn't see any profit in that, so they did not renew the contract after it expired. And in order to get a new contract, the city ended up spending an extra 40% just so somebody could handle their solids. So what I really see as a benefit there is when we are composting our biosolids, we're in control of all these costs. We're not really reliant upon some outside hauler or outside company who could raise those rates. Keeping it in-house, I think, not only costs equal to or less than what it costs to haul it out, but we're in control of those costs as well, so I'm quite pleased with that. And beyond that is obviously not just feel-good, but the real benefits to the community. So annually, we'll donate compost to community gardens, the food bank, the city parks uses our compost to keep all their parks nice and clean, and grass growing on cemeteries, as well as the streets and water department have used it. And those are just a few photos of some areas where we're using compost currently. And lastly, I would also just like to give a plug, if I may. This weekend, we are giving away compost at the compost facility. So if you'll check out the website, you can get some more information at cdaid.org, or just swing by the compost facility at 3500 Julia and pick up some free compost this weekend.
The times again for that, Mike, to pick up their free compost?
We would like you to do it at a normal hour, but it's going to be a self-served scenario. So we're going to have a pile of compost outside that we'll be replenishing. Pull up your vehicle, your trailer, and bring your shovel and shovel out of that pile, and we'll be keeping it stocked up throughout the weekend. But we'd rather you not come at 3 in the morning, but there are no hours for it.
So it's self-serve compost.
Yes, and this is just this weekend only. We're going to make it an annual event. So if you want some, come get some now. And if you miss this weekend, we do have it available at different retail outfits.
Okay. Questions for Mike? Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mike, so you sell this stuff?
Yes, we do sell it. We currently sell it to 3 different retailers in the community.
So there's revenue that comes in?
There is revenue comes in. Yeah, I didn't include that in the presentation, but we do get in revenue of about $30,000 or so every year.
Oh, wow. Going to the casino with that. So that you said that you get, last year it was 4,155 wet tons coming in.
That's correct.
How much compost goes out?
More than that.
Wow,
so
okay.
We'll turn that into, I would estimate probably about 5,000, but that's my estimation. 5,000 cubic yards or 5,000 tons going out.
And it moves, so you're not storing it anywhere?
Well, what ends up happening is, yeah, it does move, but we do end up storing it sometimes off to the side of that finished building. Once it's completely cured, we can just keep it off to the side, but we try to move it as much as we can.
So how much do you typically store?
We may store 1 or 2 piles outside of that building, but usually we'll try to get it, like you mentioned, we'll try to move it prior to having to store it outside the building.
Does it turn?
Once it's finally cured, no, it doesn't need to be turned. In fact, it doesn't turn ever. We use static piles. So underneath, if you look on this picture on number 11, those are compost piles that are curing right now, and underneath them is just some perforated pipe that's either blowing air out or sucking air in. But so you don't need to turn it because we're using blowers to.
I meant turn bad.
For oxygen to come.
So it doesn't go bad.
It doesn't go bad. Which what your meaning is, I assume, anaerobic is what we're calling it. So we're keeping it aerobic. So turning bad is when the anaerobic bacteria take over and there's no oxygen in there, then they start smelling. So by us constantly pulling air in or blowing air out, there's always oxygen there, so it never gets that stinky smell to it.
Cool, thank you.
We're quite pleased with the product.
Woody.
So I want to kind of explain how this happened. His next presentation is for building onto this site. And so I'm looking at the numbers going, well, this business costs $400,000, $380,000, and it only turns $30,000 at the end. And I went, yeah, are we doing the right thing? And that's when Mike kind of put this together and said, you know, here's what it costs us to do it. What's Post Falls doing? What's Hayden doing? What do other guys do that don't compost? So it kind of turned me around to go, I always like the product. I've used it over the years. It's really great for your garden, and be careful because things get really big really fast. And you cut it. You don't do it straight away. But I think what comes next is that 10% thing. As we've gotten more efficient at the sewer treatment plant, we're taking more of the bad stuff out, but we got more leftovers now with the less water, less solids, more solids, less water.
Right, exactly. So you would anticipate, as you know, if your city population went up 20%, that you would get in 20% more wastewater. Well, we are getting in 20% more solids. We don't see the actual wet part, the water part, as much as we are seeing in the solids part. But yeah, I mean, we've got to remove those solids, and on top of that, we're being even more efficient. So it was, whereas before, if we were removing 99.5% of the solids from the water, bring on this new tertiary system, it's going to be 99.9+%. So we're making an even cleaner product, but getting in even more solids on.
We're just getting more efficient, and I don't think I took that into consideration. Kiki picked up on it right away. So, yeah, I think it's an interesting, and now we're going to go forward, and the next thing is to ask to build these more covers, because if you need to go out and see the process. It's fascinating, and it's very organic. It's real kumbaya. It's a feel-good, huggy green thing, you know, and it's just we needed to look at the money, look at what it costs to do it, and his guys are all into it. They do nice landscaping, and they got tractors that we borrow in the winter if we need to plow. So, I mean, we're all in this together. So, and winter, it's kind of tough, isn't it? It's cold out there. And
that's our problem. That's, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but that's what I'm presenting next is that pile over there marked number 11. We're more or less looking to cover that. In the wintertime, it's cold and it's wet, and we have to move that pile outside. It takes a heck of a lot more time to compost it. We need to get to a certain temperature for a certain amount of days, and it's harder to do that when it's cold and wet outside.
So I just kind of want to give you a little background how we got there. Thanks, Mike.
My pleasure.
You still call it cake? That's what Sid called it.
We do call it cake, but we
cake.
Not here. We call it biosolids and compost. But
so at Glenn Schutt's retirement party, when you have cake, gotta watch out.
So I was going to say, Woody, you are absolutely one in a million. I could never hear of anybody say that composting was a kumbaya moment. You are.
It's the product.
That's incredible.
It's really, you got to see it to believe it, right?
I appreciate that, Woody.
Dan, English.
Well, just to say, yeah, I appreciate too at the Public Works when we got the background and some question about the cost, but you know, one, even if it, you know, just at breaking even is good, and then you add in all of the community benefit, and then I really like the idea of anything that we can control, kind of our future and destiny versus being at the mercy of market forces. So seems like a win-win all around, and so, you know, in our next phase, certainly be supportive of that. So,
any other questions for Mike? So, Ron.
Yeah, Mike, how long now has it been since we've been selling this?
We've been getting rid of it in some form or fashion for quite a while. I honestly don't know when we began selling it. I would assume shortly after we began composting it, but even prior to composting in the 80s, off picture here on my, my diagram are some drying beds that we used to use. So we would take the digested cake and and just lay it out on the ground and dry it out, and then folks in the community would come around and pick it up. And even back in those days, they were spreading it on their gardens or that sort of a thing. But we've been selling it for probably since, if I had to, I don't know, but probably for as long as we've been composting it.
Okay.
Just a couple quick things. So are you going to address the conversation about other municipality work in the next part of your presentation? We talked about that at Public Works.
So the question was asked, there are other municipalities that are concerned about what they might do with their biosolids or their cake in the future if their current mechanism of disposal didn't work out. Would we be able to handle it, basically? And although I think technically we could probably work around that and figure out a way to possibly handle it, I honestly don't think it's in the best interest of the city to go forth and try to receive it, particularly not on a regular basis, maybe as an emergency sort of a thing. The problem being other municipalities, their poop doesn't smell as good as ours. I'm sorry.
I call them the Chamber of Commerce.
I was waiting for that quote. I was just waiting for ours doesn't stink and, well, okay, I got it.
All in the frosting.
Got it.
We do anaerobic digestion of our sludge, and some of the other surrounding communities don't. That anaerobic digestion, it literally rips the cells apart. So that really breaks down as far as pathogens, vector attraction, but also odors. So in light of that, I think it would be very capital intensive and really not worth the risk to take it on as far as a regular.
Well, I wanted to tell you I appreciated you doing the presentation to get us the facts so we got good comparison and had the opportunity to explore all those things. And as you were just talking about that, I wanted to also tell you and share with council that I was able to see Mike do a presentation for the Coeur d'Alene Rotary Club. And it doesn't matter what kind of anaerobic science words you throw in there, they all think it's poo. So it was kind of interesting because this is the compost product. The Coeur de Green is a fabulous product, but you know it just has that reputation. But I did want to commend you on a great presentation. It was very very well received, and you did the city proud. So thank you very much for doing that.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, no other questions there. We'll move on to the resolution then. This resolution 18-026 is approval of professional services agreement with JUB Engineers for the design of the compost facility improvements. Mike.
Thank you.
So move.
Well, Mike, you got a couple minutes for us on that?
Sure.
Yeah.
So as we've already discussed, we're needing to increase some capacity at the compost facility. And this would be for engineering services to, I can skip forward to this next one, engineering services for covered compost, to put in a covered compost building. And if you look up on the map on screen here, this is particularly in reference to that area in blue. So this would include a three-sided building to put more of those the original composting material. So that first initial 30 days of composting, we would put in some more static piles inside, and it includes aeration and the associated grounds work that's needed as far as drainage and all that other stuff. And this would be for $67,180, which is available in this year's and earmarked in this year's budget.
Okay. Questions for Mike? Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mike, you're going to spend $68,000, $67,000 to design a three-sided building. Isn't there a catalog somewhere that you could just get a three-sided building? Why do we have to have it engineered?
Well, it's a little bit of a specialty scenario. Yes, the building itself, it's somewhat specialized. If you look to the top and the bottom, the north and the south of that blue building, it is a building that we'd be looking for possible future expansion. So there is that. However, it's also some industry-specific in-ground aeration that's required. Currently, we're using these long tubes, almost like a PVC material sort of a thing. And that's underneath those piles of compost, and that's where the air is coming or going from. Either it's being drawn into that or blown out of that. The problem is you can't use PVC. You have to use these, we're using these specific tubes, and they're falling apart. So we're switching over. They are not available anymore. We bought out the stock when they stopped manufacturing it years ago. So what we're looking for now is this technology where it's an in-ground, almost like a trench sort of a thing, and we're going to use that. So it's basically that tube is going to be part of the concrete.
It's more than just a building then.
Yes, and associated with that as well, although once that compost is final cured, you can put it down on your grass, you can do anything with it that you want to. Prior to that, which means where this is happening, you have to be very careful about getting it onto porous ground, onto dirt or something else like that. They don't want it, any spills of it onto the grass. So we're also needing to look at some topographical, what are we looking at as far as drainage, basically, in rain and snow, melt, and all that stuff.
And what's budgeted for the entire project, including the construction?
That is going to, we're looking at about a little over $500,000 probably.
Ouch.
With construction.
Why, that seems so expensive. That's just a comment, you don't have to reply.
Yep.
Any other questions for Mike? So Ron, we're ready for your motion.
Move for adoption of resolution 18-026.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
English,
Yes.
Ettinger,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
McEvers,
Yes.
Gookin,
Yeah.
Evans.
Yes.
Motion carried. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Don't forget, free compost this weekend, all day.
And get your cake. You ought to advertise it as cake.
Bring
More
your
people show
buckets,
up.
too.
keep them going. No, it's gonna be cool. You'll be surprised what it does to your garden, I gotta tell you.
I don't want to use it. I'll have to mow more.
So, other business, we have the introduction of, is it Mobile Light, Mike?
Mobility.
Mobility, kind of a strange way to spell that. So, Mobility LLC franchise agreement and setting of a public hearing for June 5th. Mike Gridley.
So that is definitely a tough act to follow, but I'll do my best. Mobility is a wireless provider. They're actually they build infrastructure in right-of-way and then lease it to companies like Sprint, I think is their #1 provider. But they've approached us about wanting to use our right-of-ways and public space, primarily right-of-ways, to install towers or antenna equipment, cable, the type of equipment that goes along with wireless cell phone transmission. So this would be a 10-year franchise agreement that would allow them to install, after our approval, install facilities in our right-of-way, the public-owned right-of-way. In exchange for that, they will provide a 5% of their general revenue or their gross revenue associated with that business to the city as payment. So this is very similar to what we've done with other utilities or other companies that want to use our right-of-way, including Avista, FatBeam, Time Warner, people like that. So it's this stage of the game is just introducing it, so announcing it, and then setting a public hearing for 30 days down the road, I think June 5th probably, where it will actually be heard and decided.
Okay. Questions for Mike on that? So we're just setting a public hearing for June 5th.
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, move to set a June 5th, 2018 public hearing for consideration of a franchise agreement with Mobility.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Now, this is a legislative hearing. This is a public hearing to declare property located at 601 West Snyder Avenue as surplus and setting a minimum value of $40,000. And we have Kyle from the Water Department. This is a legislative hearing, and there is a sign-up sheet for anyone wishing to give public testimony after Kyle gives his presentation. So go ahead, Kyle.
All right. Thank you very much, Council, for having me. I've got a couple quick pictures here to go with my presentation. The city acquired 601 West Snyder Avenue in the late 90s as a possible future well site. In 2000, the city drilled a test well at the site. The results came back with soil samples with very fine sand, which didn't make a good quality for a high production well. We hung on to the property for some time, hoping that we could develop that well. The technology and the expense just aren't worthwhile to continue with that site. So we'd like to sell that property. Staff was asked at Public Works to look at low-income housing. As a utility, we cannot participate in a low-income housing market, but as an option, the city could buy the property from the utility fund to move forward with that. I talked to legal beforehand to confirm that. The property was invested in by cap fees, so we've got to reinvest that money back into the cap fee fund for a future well site. Staff was also asked if there was property to trade elsewhere in the city. We have not found a suitable location to trade for the property. Some of the issue with trading land is we want to drill the test well first to see if the water quality and the sand and material was there worthwhile to make a high production well. That is our new policy that we use in the future for any future land, is we do a test well first on the contingency that the water quality is good, the soil samples come back positive, and then we'll move forward with the purchase of the land. And with that, I'll take any questions you might have.
Questions for Kyle? Woody?
Just a couple. Do you guys have to do appraisal value on things like that?
Yes, and we did an appraisal value with this through engineering company. 2 years ago, they came back with a market value of $40,000. I looked up on the county website. Recently, it's gone up some. I know that was mentioned a little bit lower value. That's something that we could discuss here today.
And one other question, when you poke a hole, when you drill a well, what do we got invested in that?
About, the last one I did was $38,000.
So we're not too far in the hole here, huh?
No.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for Kyle? Kiki?
Kyle, thank you. Is this an item that the surrounding property owners would be notified that the property next to them was going to be surplus?
Yes, we have to post the property a minimum of 14 days before we have a public comment, which is tonight, which we did right after the Public Works meeting.
Okay.
Dan, English.
Well, I would just say I generated some of the discussion on trying to look at, is there a way to kind of do something about low-income housing versus just having it in one of our workbooks and being a goal. So it seems like, if there's a way to get creative on this for property in the city of Coeur d'Alene that could generate, a couple of 3 units, I mean, that's a great land value. So it sounds like basically we would have to take 40,000, unless somebody else, came along, bought it for a whole lot more, but we could choose to take 40,000 out of general fund, and then you're made whole, and then we would still have the property. We've invested it, but we've kind of converted from cash into some land, and then we could hopefully get creative. I think what I hear earlier that we've got a 23% fund balance or something. So anyway, I just, if there's a way to, like I said, kind of do something for low-income housing, this would at least give us a option, but.
I think I spoke with Renata after you had the initial meeting, and we talked about making sure that we got special notices out to all of our nonprofits and low-income folks of this sale, just to make it aware that that's available, Renata. And you have a list of folks that we can directly be in contact with to inform them of the sale.
Yeah, we have an email list of about 98 folks that we notify when CDBG funding comes up, and we could utilize that same list, and the water department's been doing some outreach with who they know, so.
So we can reach out for the low-income housing folks. So, Woody?
Along that line, Renata, would CDBG qualify to purchase something like this? Doesn't really fit in the budget, does it?
Well, CDBG can't be used to do land holdings, so
Okay.
you can't what they call land bank. But if we had a partner that wanted to do development, they could seek a CDBG community grant as part of the purchase. But of course, we don't have our funds from the federal government for the next plan year yet, so it's kind of would delay any sort of sale.
Okay, thanks.
But it does sound like at least that's top of mind, that we're doing some exploration in that. So I was part of that conversation, so I appreciate that, Renata and Kyle and others.
Yeah. Any other questions for Kyle? Okay, I think that's good for now. I did have the list brought up for anyone wishing to testify, and there was no one on the list. I will ask one more time if there's someone. I'll just get your name.
Thank you. I apologize for not being on the list. I wasn't up to speed in advance. I'm James Casper.
And we'll just get you to fill that out, and then
Yes.
you can. Go ahead.
So I am the executive director with Habitat for Humanity. I started about 1.5 years ago. Actually, Mr. English was also previously at the organization. I think that might be some of his other experience and motivation for bringing up the subject. I will say that if you consider the general, condition or the general situation of property availability and cost in the city of Coeur d'Alene, it would be certainly attractive to create some sort of at least general opportunity for organizations like ours to have an access to purchase it before allowing that to go to the general market. This property is going to be attractive, obviously, to some developers looking maybe to build apartment buildings or other multi-use, facilities there, even with the shape and kind of organization of that land. And it could be worth a significant value at market. But something like this, in terms of what we're trying to do and cost per unit, we would love to have access to it. We don't need it for free, especially for organizations like ours. We do plan, for capital purchases for land to build units and to sell them to low-income individuals. But having access to do that slightly below market or before it goes to the general market would certainly be advantageous for the organizations like the other ones that might be on the list. That would be my comment.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe, Mike, legally, if we have surplus property, we have to make it available to all.
That's correct.
Yeah, even if it was to transfer from the water department to the city's general fund, we still follow the same rules.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I don't have anyone else wishing to give public comment on this issue, so I will close the public comment portion of this and look for council action.
Mayor, I move that we approve Resolution 1827, declaring property located at 601 West Nider as surplus, setting a minimum value of $40,000.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on this? Roll call, please, Renata.
Ettinger?
Yes.
Miller?
Yes.
McEvers?
Yes.
Gookin?
Yeah.
Evans?
Yes.
English?
Yes.
Motion carried. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I would move that we enter into executive session pursuant to Idaho Code 74206, Section C, which is to acquire an interest into real property which is not owned by a public agency.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Evans?
Yes.
English?
Yes.
Ettinger?
Yep.
Miller?
Yes.
McEvers?
Yes.
Gookin?
Yep.
Motion carried. We are in executive session. Thank you, everybody.